Welcome, dwellers of the dark, to Nocturnal Nightmares TV. Tonight, we journey into that primordial void. We bring you 5 true, terrifying accounts of encounters with things that do not simply hide in the dark. They are the dark dawn. So find a comfortable spot, turn down the lights, if you dare, and listen closely to the silence between the words. It is listening back. The darkness in our new house had a texture. That's the only way I can describe it. We bought the old craftsman-style home in late autumn, charmed by its hardwood floors and stained glass windows. The one part of the house that gave me pause was the basement. It was accessed by a single, heavy oak door in the kitchen. The previous owners had left a note taped to it. Keep this door closed. The insulation is poor. An odd, but seemingly practical warning. The first time I went down there, a wave of cold, dead air washed over me. The single pull-chin light bulb cast a weak, sickly yellow glow over a vast, unfinished space of crumbling stone walls and packed earth. The darkness in the corners seemed absolute heavy, as if it were swallowing the light. The first strange incident happened a week after we moved in. I went to the kitchen for a glass of water late one night and found the basement door wide open, a column of profound blackness standing in the doorway. My wife, Anna, was a heavy sleeper, so I knew it wasn't her. I closed it, bolted it, and tried to forget, but it kept happening. No matter how securely I locked it, I'd find it open in the morning, gaping like a silent mouth. I decided to run an experiment. I took a ball of bright red twine, tied one end to the doorknob, and unspooled it across the kitchen to a chair leg. If the door opened, the twine would be pulled taut. The next morning, I found the door open, the blackness beyond it seeming to mock me. But the twine wasn't taut. It was severed, lying limp on the floor, the end cut as cleanly as if by a razor. My blood ran cold. The silence was the next thing. The basement didn't just feel quiet. It felt like it was actively consuming sound. If I dropped a tool on the concrete floor near the stairs, the clang would be jarringly short, muffled, as if the sound waves were being smothered by a heavy blanket. One day, I took a small radio down there, turned it to a static station, and left it on the top step. As I slowly closed the door, the hissing static didn't just get quieter. It was erased, completely silenced before the door was even fully shut. The darkness down there didn't just hide things. It devoured noise. Anna started noticing it too. This house groans so much, she'd say, but I never hear a sound from downstairs. It's like the floor is a mile thick. She was right. The house creaked and settled, but the basement remained a pocket of absolute, profound silence in our home. My rational mind, the part of me that clung to logic, was fraying at the edges. I needed to see what was down there. Armed with the brightest flashlight I owned, a heavy-duty maglite, I unbolted the door one Saturday afternoon. The familiar wave of cold, dead air hit me. I flicked on the flashlight, its powerful beam cutting into the gloom, and pulled the chain for the overhead bulb. It flickered twice, then went out with a soft pop. I stepped onto the top stair, my flashlight beam feeling pitifully small. The darkness felt present. It wasn't just an absence of light. It was a physical entity, pressing in from all sides. I descended slowly, each step echoing into nothingness. I swept the beam across the room. Nothing, just stone walls, old shelves laden with dusty jars, and the earthen floor. Then I heard it. Not a sound, but the absence of a sound becoming a presence. It was like the feeling of a vast, empty space inhaling. A slow, rhythmic pressure change in the air. I held my breath, listening. The flashlight beam began to flicker. I tapped it against my palm, but it only grew dimmer, the cone of light visibly shrinking as if it were being siphoned away. The darkness was drinking it. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I aimed the weakening beam towards the far corner of the basement, the darkest part. For a split second, I saw it. I wished to God I hadn't. It wasn't a monster of claws and teeth. It was a shape. A vaguely man-shaped hole in the reality of the room. It was blacker than the surrounding black. A patch of absolute void that was visibly absorbing the light from my dying flashlight. It had no features, but I could feel it looking at me. I could feel its immense, ancient stillness. And it was big. It was crouched, but it was still easily 8 feet tall. I didn't scream. The sound was stolen from my lungs before it could form. I turned and scrambled up the stairs, my feet slipping, my hands clawing at the wooden steps. I burst back into the warm, bright reality of my kitchen, slamming the heavy oak door behind me and fumbling with the bolt. I stood there, panting, my heart hammering against my ribs, bathed in the comforting afternoon sunlight streaming through the window. We moved out a week later. I didn't tell Anna what I saw. I just told her the foundation was cracked and the house was unsafe. We sold it at a loss, desperate to get away. The new owners were a young, happy couple, just like us. I still feel a pang of guilt when I think of them. But the real terror is this. It didn't stay in the basement. The last 2 nights we were in that house, something changed. The house grew quieter. The normal creaks and groans began to fade. The light bulbs in the hallway leading to the kitchen started flickering and dying, one by one. The darkness wasn't contained anymore. It was leaking. I now live in a modern apartment on the 10th floor, a place with no basement. But sometimes, late at night, when the city outside is quiet, I feel it. A subtle pressure change in the air. I see the light from the street lamp outside my window seem too dim for just a moment. And I know that the thing from that basement, the silent, light-eating void, is patient, and it remembers me. And someday, I know I'll turn on a light, and the darkness will just drink it down. The first rule of caving is to respect the dark. The second is that the dark doesn't respect you back. I learned that lesson half a mile beneath the surface of the earth, in a section of calico caverns that wasn't on any map. I was a solo spelunker, an adrenaline junkie who chased the thrill of squeezing through undiscovered passages. It was a foolish, arrogant pursuit, and the cavern system finally decided to teach me some humility. A sudden rock slide, a shower of stone and dust, and the passage I'd just shimmied through was gone. My leg was pinned, a searing white-hot pain shooting up from my ankle. It was broken, badly, after the echoes of the collapse died away. A new kind of silence fell. This was absolute dark, a physical, smothering blackness so complete that my brain, starved of input, started to create its own phantom lights-fant, swimming phosphenes in the void. My headlamp was smashed. My pack, with my spare batteries and glow sticks, was 10 feet away, lost in the rubble on the other side. I was alone, crippled, and entombed. Panic is a useless emotion in that situation. It burns oxygen. I focused on my breathing, on the searing pain in my ankle, trying to ground myself. Days blurred together. I had 2 bottles of water and a single protein bar. I rationed them, my world shrinking to the rhythm of my own heartbeat, and the slow drip of water somewhere in the oppressive black dot. It was on the 3rd cycle of waking and sleeping that I first heard it. A whisper, so faint, I was sure it was an auditory hallucination. My mind starting to fray. It was the sound of my own name. Jai. It was a perfect imitation of my mother's voice. She'd been gone for years, but I'd have known that gentle, worried tone anywhere. I screamed her name, my voice cracking, a raw, desperate sound that the cavern swallowed whole. Then, silence again. I told myself I was losing it. The isolation, the darkness, the pain, it was a perfect recipe for madness. But the next day, it happened again. This time, it was my father's voice, a gruff, booming sound that had no place in this tight, enclosed space. Son, is that you? We're coming for you. Just hold on. Hope that cruel, beautiful poison flooded my system. A rescue team. They'd found me. I yelled back, screaming until my throat was raw, telling them I was alive, that my leg was broken. I described my vocation as best I could. After my frantic shouting died down, a voice answered, closer this time. It was my father again, but his voice was wrong. It was a perfect mimicry, yet hollow, stripped of all warmth, broken. Leg, the voice repeated, a flat, toneless echo of my own word. Screaming, so much screaming a chill that had nothing to do with the cavern's temperature snaked down my spine. It wasn't a rescue team. It was repeating me. It was learning. The game changed. The whispers stopped trying to comfort me and started to torment me. It used the voices of my ex-girlfriend, accusing me of never loving her. It used the voice of a childhood friend I'd had a falling out with, whispering insults I'd long since forgotten. It sifted through my memories, pulling out my deepest regrets and fears and flinging them back at me in the perfect voices of the people they belonged to. It was a psychological vivisection, performed in the pitch black, and then came the other. Sounds. It started mimicking the drip of water, only the rhythm was slightly off. It mimicked the scuttling of cave crickets, but the sound was too heavy, too deliberate. It was practicing, and it was getting closer. I could hear it moving by the darkness around me. A dry, rustling, dragging sound, like old parchment being pulled over rough stone. I finally managed to work my leg free. The pain was excruciating, but the fear was a greater motivator. I started crawling, dragging my shattered leg behind me, moving away from the voices, away from the dragging sound. The cavern system was a maze, but I had one desperate, slim hope. I could feel a faint draft of air. Airflow meant another entrance. It followed me. It didn't need to see. It just needed me to make a sound. A whimper of pain, the scrape of my clothes on the rock, the chattering of my teeth. And every time I did, it would mimic it perfectly. A mocking echo that let me know it was right behind me. It began to whisper my own thoughts back to me. So scared, leg hurts, going to die down here. It would hiss in a perfect replica of my own inner voice. I don't know how long I crawled. Hours, days. My mind was a shattered wreck. I was navigating by the faint whisper of moving air, propelled by pure animal terror. The dragging sound was always just behind me, the mocking, voices swirling in the blackness. Then I saw it. A faint grey patch in the otherwise absolute darkness. An opening moonlight. I sobbed. A raw, ragged sound. The thing behind me mimicked the sob perfectly. A sound of pure, chilling mockery. I scrambled faster, clawing my way over the rocks, towards that beautiful, beautiful grey light. I tumbled out of a narrow crevice onto a moonlit ledge, gasping the cool night air. My body a wreck of pain and exhaustion. I looked back at the opening. For a moment, nothing. Then, from the absolute blackness of the cave mouth, a single, pale, slender limb, like a bleached root, snaked out. It had too many joints. It tapped the moonlit rock once, then recoiled back into the darkness as if the light were painful. It couldn't follow me into the light. I was rescued the next day by a pair of hikers who saw my frantic waving. The official story is that I'm a lucky survivor, a testament to human endurance. They set my leg, and I began the slow process of recovery. But I know I didn't escape alone. The darkness in that cavern was ancient, and it was intelligent. It wasn't just a mimic. It was a parasite, an echo eater. It feasted on sound, on emotion, on memory, and a part of it latched onto me. I live in the city now, surrounded by noise and light. I can't stand silence. I sleep with the TV on, music playing, anything to drown out the quiet. Because sometimes, in the dead of night, when the city finally sleeps and a deep silence falls over my apartment, I hear it from the darkest corner of my room. I'll hear a faint, perfect echo of a sound from my day. The jingle of my keys, the ring of my phone, and sometimes, in a perfect imitation of my own voice, a single, soft, inquisitive whisper. I'm an electrical engineer. I've always understood darkness as a simple absence of photons, a state of null energy. I was wrong. Darkness can be a habitat. It can be a hunting ground. And last summer, during the worst heat wave in the city's history. I learned that it can also be a mess. It started with the rolling blackouts. The city's power grid was overloaded, struggling under the strain of 1,000,000 air conditioners running full blast. Every night, like clockwork, a different sector of the city would go dark for an hour. It was an annoyance, a fact of life in the sweltering heat. My apartment building, a 30-story tower in the heart of downtown, was hit on the third night. The lights flickered, the AC died, and we were plunged into a sudden, suffocating darkness, lit only by the distant glow of the still-powered parts of the city. That's when I first heard the clicking. It was a faint, chittering sound, like 1,000 tiny grasshoppers coming from outside my 20th floor window. I peered out into the muggy night, but saw nothing. I dismissed it as the sound of the building's metal frame contracting in. The heat that next night our sector was spared, but the one just east of us went dark. I was on my balcony, watching the massive block of the city grid wink out of existence. As the darkness fell, I saw it. For just a second, silhouetted against the ambient city glow, something crawled up the side of a darkened skyscraper. It was immense, spidery, easily the size of a city bus, with long, spindly legs and a segmented, insect-like body. It moved with a jerky, unnatural speed, then vanished as it rounded the corner of the building. I blinked, convinced it was a heat hallucination. No one else seemed to notice. The disappearances started a few days later. Just single people living alone in crisis. The news called them victims of the heat wave. People who had succumbed to the high temperatures during the blackouts. It was plausible. It was a good story. But I had seen the thing on the building. The clicking sound grew more frequent. I started hearing it in the walls of my own apartment, in the ventilation shafts. A dry, rhythmic skittering, always more active when the sun went down. My neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, complained to the building manager about bugs in the wiring. He assured her it was impossible. She was one of the people they found a week later. I became obsessed. I started tracking the blackouts, cross-referencing them with the missing persons reports. The pattern was undeniable. The disappearances only ever happened in the sectors that were blacked out. The darkness wasn't a consequence of the grid failure. The grid failure was a tool. Something was intentionally causing the blackouts. It was creating its own hunting grounds. I tried to go to the police. They looked at me like I was insane. A giant bug that eats people during power outages. They politely suggested I see a therapist. That the night it came for our building was the worst of the heat wave. The power cut out with a final, definitive thud. The emergency lights in the hallways flickered on, then immediately died, one by one, corridor by corridor, starting from the ground floor and moving up. The clicking was deafening now, a storm of chittering from all around us, from inside the walls, from outside the windows. The building's fire alarm shrieked to life, then was abruptly silenced with a sound like tearing metal dot. My phone rang. It was a friend from a building across the street. His voice a panicked scream. "Oh God, Alex, look at your building. Look at your building. I scrambled to the window, my heart hammering. My friend was right. Clinging to the side of my building were dozens of them. Not one giant bug, but a swarm of smaller ones, each the size of a large dog. They were black, chitinous horrors, all legs and multifaceted eyes that glowed with a faint internal red light. And they were methodically moving from window to window, smashing the glass with their sharp forelimbs and crawling inside. I could hear the distant screams of my neighbors, screams that were cut off with sickening, wet crunches. They were systematically clearing the building, floor by floor. They were on floor 16, 17. They were coming up. I ran, grabbing a heavy fire extinguisher. My apartment was a death trap. My only hope was the roof. I burst into the hallway, a terrifying cacophony of screaming, shattering glass, and that awful, constant clicking. I sprinted for the emergency stairwell. The door was jammed. Something was holding it shut from the other side. I could hear a slow, deliberate scratching on the metal dock. It was already in the stairwell. Trapped, I ran back to my apartment and locked the door, piling furniture against it. I looked at the vast, dark window. It was my only way out, a drop to the street below. A scraping sound started at the glass. One of them was right outside. Its hideous, multi-lensed face pressed against the pane, its red eyes staring directly at me. It raised a limb and struck the glass. A spiderweb of cracks appeared. It hit the glass again, harder this time. The window pattered inwards before it could crawl in. I acted on pure, adrenaline-fueled instinct. I smashed the fire extinguisher into the creature's face. It shrieked, a sound like grinding stone and high-frequency static, and recoiled. I didn't hesitate. I climbed onto the windowsill. Below me, the city was a tapestry of light and shadow. I could see the swarm covering my building, a living cancer, black carapaces and red eyes. And then I saw the big one, the mother. It was clinging to the central power substation 2 blocks away, its massive, spidery limbs wrapped around the transformers. It wasn't just feeding. It was laying something. Small, glowing pods being injected directly into the heart of the city's power grid. The horrifying truth crashed down on me. This wasn't just a hunt. It was an infestation. The city wasn't just a feeding ground. It was an incubator. These creatures didn't just thrive in the dark. They were turning our entire civilization into a nursery for their young. The creature at my window lunged again. I didn't think. I just jumped. I aimed for the balcony of the apartment below, a desperate, insane gamble. My fingers caught the railing. The impact nearly tore my arms from their sockets, but I held on. I pulled myself over, my body screaming, hit in protest, and ran, smashing through the balcony door into a stranger's empty apartment. I didn't stop running until I was on the street, lost in the panicked crowds. I left the city that night. I live in a small rural town now, completely off the grid. I generate my own power. I'm safe for now. But every night I watch the news, And I see the reports of worsening power crises in major cities across the globe. They call it aging infrastructure. They call it climate change. I know what it really is. The blackout bugs are spreading, and sooner or later, the whole world is going to be their nest. And when the final global blackout comes, they will emerge from the darkness to claim it. The job posting was an anachronism, a relic from another time. Lighthouse keeper wanted for St. Jude's Reach, isolated post, 6-month contract, lodging provided, discretion and resilience essential. I was a historian, a man in love with solitude and the sea. And the idea was impossibly romantic. And to my surprise, I was hired without so much as a phone interview. My only instruction was to arrive at a small, wind-beaten fishing village in Maine, where a man named Silas would ferry me out to the island. St. Jude's Reach wasn't an island so much as a jagged black tooth of rock jutting from the perpetually grey Atlantic. The lighthouse itself was a grim granite tower, lashed by wind and spray. Silas, a man whose face was a roadmap of wrinkles and unspoken warnings, helped me unload my supplies. His only advice, delivered in a low, gravelly voice, was keep delight burning, no matter what, and never, ever let it go out, not even for a second. My first few weeks were I fell into the rhythm of the place, maintaining the lamp, polishing the great Fresnel lens, recording weather patterns in the logbook. The isolation was a bomb. But as the summer wore on, a subtle wrongness began to creep in. The darkness around St. Jude's Reach was different. It was a deeper, more profound black than I had ever experienced. A darkness that seemed to have weight and presence. The fog that rolled in wasn't just water vapor. It was thick, oily, and unnaturally silent. I started noticing things during low tide. The tide would recede an incredible distance, exposing a vast, black, weed-slicked seabed dotted with strange rock formations. At first, I thought they were just rocks. But as I watched them through the powerful lens of the lamproom, I realized they were moving. They were figures. Tall, hunched, vaguely humanoid shapes that would rise from the muck and walk slowly across the exposed seafloor, their movements jerky and arthritic. They never came close to the island, always staying at the edge of the tide line, seeming to pace just beyond the reach of the lighthouse's beam. I wrote about them in the logbook. My scientific curiosity warring with a primal fear. I called them the low-tide walkers. I tried to rationalize them as a strange, unclassified species of crustacean, or seals distorted by the distance and the mist. But I knew I was lying to myself. Then came the gifts. I would wake to find things left on the narrow stone walkway at the base of the tower. Strange, spiraled shells that were geometrically perfect but belonged to no known mollusk. Pieces of driftwood carved with unsettling, non-Euclidean patterns. And once, a single, perfect black pearl the size of a pigeon's egg, sitting on a bed of glistening black seaweed. It was cold to the touch, and it seemed to drink the light from the room. I threw it back into the sea. The walkers grew bolder. They started coming closer, their dark, indistinct forms moving with a terrifying purpose. I could see them more clearly now. They had long, spindly limbs, bodies that seemed to be made of wet, black stone, and featureless heads that tilted at impossible angles as they stared up at my light. The night of the storm, everything changed. A tempest of biblical proportions descended on St. Jude's Reach. The waves were mountains of black water crashing against my rock. The wind a physical scream. And through the maelstrom, I saw them, dozens of them. They were no longer confined to the seabed. They were walking through the churning waves, their forms impervious to the crushing force of the water, all of them heading for my island. Panic set in. I triple-checked the great lamp, its powerful beam cutting a defiant arc through the raging darkness. I locked the heavy iron door at the base of the tower and retreated to the lamp room, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I could hear them now, a scraping, clicking sound as they began to climb the slick rock of the island. Then a sound that made my soul turn to ice, a soft, wet tapping on the thick glass of the lamp room, 100 feet above the raging sea. One of them was outside, clinging to the tower. I scrambled back from the window, my breath catching in my throat. I could see its silhouette against the driving rain at all. Skeletal horror with limbs that bent at too many joints. It had no face, only a smooth, dark surface that seemed to ripple as it pressed against the glass. It was then, in my terror, that I found the old keeper's hidden logbook, tucked away in a loose stone beneath the lamp's pedestal. His final entries were a frantic, mad scrawl. "The light is not a warning," he had written. "It is a hook. It is a lure." I thought I was keeping the ships safe from them, but I was keeping them safe for the ships. My mind reeled. I flipped through the pages. He wrote about the light, how its specific frequency, its rhythmic pulse, didn't repel the creatures. It was a catalyst. It drew them from the abyssal depths, and it fed them. It nourished them, made them stronger, drew them towards the surface world. My job wasn't to be a sentinel. It was to be a farmer, a zookeeper. 4 monsters from the bottom of the sea. The gifts weren't offerings. They were payments. The tapping on the glass grew more insistent, joined by others. The entire lamp room was surrounded. I looked down at the churning sea. It wasn't just the walkers anymore. Something else was rising from the depths. Something immense, a colossal, shadowed shape, vast beyond comprehension. Its form blotting out the lightning flashes. The walkers were just its heralds, its children. I was faced with a horrifying choice. Follow Silas's warning and keep the light burning. Feeding the things outside, nurturing the colossal horror in the deep until it was strong enough to rise, or break my one sacred rule. I made my choice. With a trembling hand, I grabbed a heavy wrench and, with a final, desperate prayer, I smashed the great Fresnel lens. The light died. The lamp room was plunged into absolute roaring darkness. The storm outside the only sound. The tapping stopped. A profound, expectant silence fell, even the wind seeming to hold its breath. And then, a new sound began. A low, guttural, hungry roar of rage from the deep. A sound of betrayal. A sound that was no longer being lulled and fed, but was now fully, terribly awake. The tower groaned as something immense collided with its base. I don't know what will happen when they finally break through the door. I am writing this in the last few moments of battery on my phone. The granite is cracking. I made the wrong choice. I see that now. The light wasn't just feeding them. It was the only thing placating them. It was keeping them content. By letting the light die, I didn't just stop being their keeper. I just became their first meal. Mission Day 274. This is Commander Eva Restova. Final log entry. The Orion is silent now, save for the hum of the life support and the frantic beating of my own heart. I am the sole occupant of this station, a lonely sentinel orbiting a dead world 1 billion miles from home. For 9 months, the silence and the darkness have been my only companions. I was wrong. We were never alone. The anomaly began subtly, a recurring sensor glitch on the exterior hull, always in the same spot. Sector Gamma, the ship's primary communications array, a place perpetually bathed in the shadow of the main habitat module. The diagnostics always came back clean. The glitch was dismissed as a quirk of deep space radiation. Then came the cold spots. I'd be floating through a corridor and pass through a pocket of air that was, inexplicably, unnaturally frigid. Not a draft, a patch of still biting cold that would vanish as quickly as it appeared. I logged it, but mission control had no explanation. The real fear started with the static. I was reviewing a transmission from Earth, a message from my daughter, her voice a precious, tinny sound across the void. Suddenly, the audio was overwhelmed by a burst of harsh, white noise. In the heart of the static, just for a second, I heard a whisper. It was faint, dry, and sibilant, like sand falling on paper. It sounded like it was right behind me. I spun, around. The empty corridor stretched out, silent. The incidents escalated. Tools left secured to a wall would be found floating in the middle of a room. The ship's internal lights would flicker and die in whatever module I was in, plunging me into a terrifying, temporary blackness, only to come back on moments later. The cold spots grew larger, more frequent. The whispers and the static became clearer, though I could never make out the words. It was a language of pure entropy, of cold, empty space. I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that something was on the station with me. But the Orion is a closed system. Every hatch is sealed. Every millimeter of the hull is monitored. Nothing could get in. My breaking point came during a routine. Eva, to inspect the communications array sector Gamma. As I maneuvered my suit into the ship's shadow, my suit's thermometer plummeted. The temperature dropped to a level that should have been impossible, far colder than the vacuum of space itself. And in the profound, absolute darkness of the ship's shadow, I saw it. It wasn't a creature of flesh and bone. It was a bet of space that was wrong, a shimmering, man-sized distortion, a hole in the fabric of the universe that was blacker than the void around it. It didn't reflect the light of the distant stars. It consumed it. It was a sentient piece of the dark, a living vacuum. As I stared, paralyzed, a thin, whip-like tendril of pure blackness lashed out from it and touched the hull of the Orion. Where it touched, the metal instantly frosted over with a lattice of ice crystals, the sensor glitch on my display flaring. Read before dying completely. It had been living there the whole time, hiding in the ship's shadow, feeding on the weak energy of the communications array. It wasn't an invader. It had been a stowaway. I scrambled back inside, my mind screaming. I sealed the airlock and sent a frantic, coded message to mission. Control. Compromised. Hostile non-terrestrial entity on exterior hull. It is the dark. I repeat, it is the dark. The reply was chillingly calm. Orion, we are showing no external anomaly. All systems green. Please perform a psychological self-assessment. They didn't believe me, or worse, they already knew. I locked myself in the command module, watching the monitors with a growing, sickening dread. I realized the cold spots, the flickering lights, weren't random. They were mapping the ship, learning its system. And I finally understood why. The communications array was just an appetizer. The main course was the ship's reactor, a miniature sun of fusion energy deep within the station's core. It got inside an hour ago. I don't know how. The power in the outer modules failed, one by one, the life support systems going dead. The station is being consumed. The light and heat siphoned away into an unbreachable cold. The whispers are no longer in the static. They are in the walls, in the air, in my head. A constant, dry, rustling sound. The sound of dying stars. The door to the command module is frozen solid. The temperature on the other side is reading absolute zero. I can see my breath, a cloud of white vapor in the dying light of the console. The lights are flickering now. In the moments of darkness, I can feel it in the room with me. Not a presence, but an absence. A void where heat and life used to be. I see now. This creature doesn't hate life. It doesn't hate light. It is a fundamental force of the universe. And it is hungry. It is the eternal, ravenous dark between the stars. And for a brief, arrogant moment, we lit a candle in its domain. And it has come to snuff it out. The primary light just went out. The console is flashing red, a final, futile warning. The emergency lights are gone. It's so cold. The whispering is right beside me now. It's a beautiful, terrible sound. Sound of everything ending. This is Commander Restova signing off. The darkness is, and so the light dies. The signal is lost. The darkness reclaims its own. It is an endless, patient hunger. From the deepest basement on your street to the coldest void between galaxies, the 5 souls you heard from tonight looked into the abyss, and they learnt the terrible truth. The dark is not empty. It is waiting. It is watching. And it is far more crowded than any of us could possibly imagine. The next time you find yourself in a silent, darkened room, and you feel that primal urge to flip on a light. Pause for a moment. Feel the weight buff the air. Listen. You may discover you are not quite as alone as you thought. Hank. You for walking with us through the shadows. Until next time, stay safe and try to remember. Every darkness has a shape. This is Nocturnal Nightmares.